Hello, everyone. Raul and Rai and Fernando, how are you guys doing?
Oh, hi there. Awesome. Welcome,
Hi,
Rose.
George.
Yeah, welcome, Raul, Rai here at Zureta. We're starting today a series about the service mesh. Start with STU, and Raul just put together like a very nice workshop as one of many that content that has been created by Raul in the last few years, and I think you have books, you have blogs, and a lot of content published there. And we have the pleasure to have Raul to break these. Probably be 7 parts, around 7 parts, but we're going to do the introduction today. Raul, all yours, and don't make sure that you subscribe for the Azureta channel here. Just click there and follow us and follow all the content that Raul is going to be showing us here. There's a lot of options that you can follow him. And thank you for joining us.
Yes, and activate the notifications to watch the next parts from this series. Right, Raul?
Yeah, thank you, George and Fernando. I'm very glad to be with you two and demo my workshop in a video format that I have presented at a few other venues. So the motivation behind building this workshop was to get people onboarded on Istio as fast as possible. We all know that Istio is the most popular service mesh right now. It enjoys a massive majority over the other implementations of service meshes. There is a very good reason behind that because the majority of use cases of service mesh are satisfied by Istio, some of which are absent from other implementations. Although many other implementations are fast catching up, it still enjoys a massive majority for now. And learning service mesh, at least one flavor of service mesh, is quite important because as we see that service meshes are converging together with the implementation of service mesh interface, also known as SMI. Once you understand programming one of the service meshes, you would essentially have the capability to program any service mesh later down the line. So with that, I will start with a brief introduction of this workshop. This workshop would be made up of up to 7 parts. There is a Catacoda component to this workshop as well, which you can access using the link that is written on the bottom of every slide. So this is so in this workshop we are going to talk about several topics. We'll start with a very brief introduction of Kubernetes, which, as we all know, that is the default implementation of a default service orchestrator that is used by almost each and every organization nowadays, and how service mesh enhances the capabilities of Kubernetes by adding in a bunch of features that essentially reach your applications for free. We will then discuss about a little bit about Istio. We will then talk about the components that make up the Istio and the services that it provides in the later workshop. In this particular segment, we will cover the bit up to, we will end this workshop with installation of Istio. In the later workshop, we will pick up the rest of the features and we'll see every feature that Istio provides in action. So I will start with a brief introduction of myself. I work as an engineering tech lead at Zipco, which is a popular buy now, pay later platform. I've been working for over 12 years on web and cloud. I have authored a very short title on Istio and another one on Kubernetes. So if you are interested in reading these titles, the link is available in the slide. You can also connect me on my socials through the links that are available below my profile. So let's start with discussing microservices. I'm pretty sure that it's not a new term to most of the people, but just to recap, I will cover a few basic tenets of microservices. So microservices are very small units of service that you can independently develop and deploy. More specifically, a service is developed and owned by a particular team which owns its development and deployment. So what do you get with these small units of services that can function on their own in a very isolated manner is that if one of the parts of your application fails, you can quickly zone down on the service that broke down and apply your fixes to it. Since these services can be independently built by independent teams, the teams own the technology stack, so it is very easy to onboard people and get them up to speed with developing features on microservices as compared to a massive monolith. With a smaller service, obviously you get better maintainability because there is lesser code base and lesser complexity to take care of. So if an organization has a bunch of services running to power their applications, how are we going to deploy them? Because an application generally consists of a number of microservices that work together. So some of the common deployment patterns that you would see across different organizations would fall into one of the four categories. So you would see that either they would be hosting multiple service instances on a single VM, or if certain services require a lot more memory or are much more CPU intensive, you would see that certain such services would be deployed on a dedicated VM, which might be physical or a virtual machine. Nowadays, containers are in, so most of the organizations are moving towards containerizing their workloads. So you would see that in most of the cases, services are deployed in a container and they're left up to an orchestrator like Kubernetes to manage. Serverless is also another wave that is going on in parallel. So you would often see that certain services, most often stateless, are often deployed on serverless platforms. So with that, when you have a bunch of services to take care of, you do need an orchestrator to manage how these services are placed and how they are executed. So Kubernetes is a very popular container orchestration platform. So most of the organizations you would see nowadays are shifting their workloads to Kubernetes because organizations, a typical organization would own hundreds of microservices, and managing and maintaining, even if they are containerized, hundreds and thousands of containers is not humanly possible. So we do need a software-based solution there, and Kubernetes obviously fits the bill. So what Kubernetes does is it manages containers for you. You provide it a spec, it reads that spec, and puts your container workloads on the nodes based on the knowledge that it has of the cluster which it is operating on. So orchestration is its key capability. It knows where to place the service, how to monitor its health. If a service instance goes down, it would reprovision it somewhere on another healthy node if node health is an issue. So Kubernetes is made up of 4 small components. A control plane, which you can call as the brain of Kubernetes. That's where the etcd and the API server live. So these are the components that keep monitoring the nodes and the services and keep a record of their states in the database that is the etcd. Nodes are the physical components, so VMs where your workloads are deployed. Pod is the smallest unit of deployment in Kubernetes. So when you deploy your service, it actually goes and lives within a pod. To manage Kubernetes, you need a CLI and kubectl. Different people call it with different names, but that's what I call it. Kubectl is the CLI that is used to manage Kubernetes. So with that, let's move on to the major building blocks of Kubernetes. The good thing about Kubernetes is that even though it has massive infrastructure components, to program it, you only need to understand a couple of programming constructs, also called as objects. So some of the core constructs in Kubernetes that you might use day to day are deployment, which is used to define your container and its memory and the CPU requirements. Then there are services. Services are an abstraction over your deployments. So if you have, but think of them as a load balancer for your deployment. So if your deployment, for example, says that you need 5 containers to run at all the time in your cluster, then services would provide an address to it. It will make them discoverable. So it will add a DNS entry for your deployment. So whenever a traffic comes to a service, it will automatically reach one of the instances of deployments that you have running. Services themselves are of multiple types. One is cluster IP. So a service of type cluster IP will get a unique IP within the cluster. So any traffic that is routed to that IP reaches one of the target pods. Node port service opens a particular port on each of your nodes. So if you route your traffic to any of the nodes on the port that is specified for a service of type node port, would automatically reach one of the pods. Load balancer service, as the name suggests, so it attaches itself to a cloud-based load balancer. And when any traffic reaches that load balancer endpoint, it would automatically reach one of the pods that is currently serving your workloads. Now, these programming constructs are grouped under a construct called namespace. So under think of namespace as a boundary for your deployments and services. So if your application consists of a number of services and deploy a number of services, you can put them under a single namespace. That way it is easier for you to manage your services independently within Kubernetes. So now that we understand the concept of microservices and Kubernetes as an orchestration platform for the services, we'll now jump on to the motivation behind having a service mesh in your architecture in the first place. So service mesh fulfills a couple of responsibilities. It actually enhances your Kubernetes cluster. So as we saw that Kubernetes provides a bunch of programming constructs to us that we can use to deploy and manage our services. Service mesh actually enhances those capabilities by adding several more programming constructs to Kubernetes. So the main motivation behind having a service mesh is that you have several services in your cluster and they're working fine independently. Now you want to implement concerns, for example, security. You don't want service A to be able to talk to service B, or let's say you don't want any of the services within your cluster to talk to, let's say, a Bitcoin mining endpoint or anything of that sorts, or some insecure traffic to reach your services. So there are concerns like those that come up once you have many services running in your cluster. And you don't want to implement solutions for such concerns independently. You want to implement a common policy in your system, in your cluster, through which you can manage such concerns. That's where service meshes come in. So service mesh only solves the problem of service to service communication. That's what their scope is. If you have looked at the OSI stack, service meshes would fit between layer 5 and layer 1 of OSI network stack. The concerns of Kubernetes are generally much lower than that. So there is a clear separation between these. As I already said, that service to service communication is the primary reason why service meshes exist. So east-west networking, a common technical term that you would hear often, is what they fulfill. The other one is north-south, which is traffic coming in from outside and going through your applications and going somewhere else. So
yeah, I have a question on that.
Yeah.
I mean, before that, the way that we block traffic was like firewall. And I think the main difference, if people try to explain what that's going to replace, like we don't have to be looking firewall. We just say this service can talk with this one, and it's more like a high level configuration. I think that's what I think. That's a nice, really nice thing on Service Mesh.
Yeah. So applications like firewalls and many others, for example, API gateway, you generally position them on the nodes that serve your traffic, serve your workloads. So even within a node, you can have you can package your services inside it. You can have a very dense deployment of applications within the nodes. So it's very hard to implement firewall policies within the services that are actually packaged within the node. You can set up boundaries so that any traffic doesn't leave the node or doesn't come into the node, or for example, for that instance, any VMs or as such. But how would you manage application security concerns within the applications that are positioned in the node? And the problem gets even more complex when Kubernetes decides where to place your service. So you have to, as in your security policy has to be uniform across everything. Of course, that doesn't mean that we don't need them, but it fulfills a slightly different responsibility.
Yeah, I like to compare, Rahul, Service Mesh with, imagine if everyone working in our office, we have just one like reception or like one assistant for everyone. And now we can have one assistant for each person, like each service is the person. Now I have my assistant. If you want to talk to me, you have to talk with my assistant. He's going to look the traffic and send to me, kind of.
Yep, that's your personal secretary to each service, or you can think of it as a translator. That's how I generally explain it to people. So say you whatever communication comes to you has to come via the translator. That's how generally I explain the concept of sidecars,
That's
which
great.
is one of the fundamentals behind Service Mesh, which we'll soon see. But these are some of the primary motivations behind having a service mesh in the first place. So this is a typical architecture of a service mesh. Most of the implementations of service mesh that you would see find in the market, Istio, Linkerd, OSM, even for that matter, all of them would have an architecture similar to this one. So you have your workload running as denoted by the gray box. And as I was just explaining, a companion to it running side by side, which is called a sidecar. And any traffic to reach the underlying service has to go through the sidecar. So what happens is that all of the application concerns are handled within the sidecar, and the communication between your service and the sidecar often happens in plain text. because it doesn't need to be secure. In fact, if you don't implement much security between your sidecar and your microservice, you get to implement many more features because the sidecar can look at the packets in a much better way and understand it, and implement some finer grained traffic routing policies. A sidecar, in general, the implementation of sidecar that you would find is Envoy, which is used by the service mesh, by the Istio, the very recent service mesh OSM, and some other implementations as well. So the sidecar has a few policies, but it doesn't have many programming constructs available that you can use to apply policies on. So that's where two components come into play. One is the control plane, another one is the data plane. Should have said management plane as well. So three components. So what control plane does is it sends policies to the sidecars. So for example, let's talk about traffic routing. So let's say firewall-like policies. Let's say service A shouldn't be able to talk to service B. So you can't, if you think about it logically, you can't, it's very improbable that you would go to each sidecar instance and hand over a policy to it that, yes, your service A, you're not able to, you shouldn't be able to talk to service B. Your service B, you shouldn't be able to talk to service C. So control plane sits at a layer above sidecars. It's not to say that all the components that are there in the diagram are physical units, as we'll soon see how physically these units are segregated. But control plane is a construct that sits above the sidecars. You pass in your policy to the control plane and it will distribute the policies across sidecars. The data plane and management plane, they're again logical constructs. They are more used for supplying policy related data to it, for example, certificates, or if the sidecar needs to query for application state, it needs to have visibility of the cluster. So that kind of information is served by the management plane and data plane to the sidecars. That's how it gets complete visibility of the cluster. So let's move on to some of the use cases. I think I've discussed this enough before, but let's go through some of the common use cases for which you would want to implement service mesh in the first place. So you have a bunch of services running in your cluster, but you don't know how traffic is flowing between them, and you want to have, and the company admin or even the support staff wants to gain an understanding of how different services are talking to each other. So observability is one of the key concerns why companies generally implement service mesh. I've seen several clients implement service mesh just to bring in observability to their system without adding a bunch of telemetry or bring in a bunch of tools just to add more visibility into the system. As I said, that service meshes enhance your cluster. So one of the ways they enhance your Kubernetes cluster is by adding support for a much better way of deploying stuff. So in Kubernetes, you generally deploy either by stopping off all of your pods at one instance, deploying a new version, then moving on, or you will deploy them in a rolling update manner. So you take a bunch of pods down, patch them, and then move on to the next set of pods. But these are very rudimentary ways of deploying your applications. In modern applications, you would often see there are different approaches being used. One of them is blue-green deployment. So you have two versions of your services running at the same time. Once and that's why these are the two colors. I don't know what's the motivation behind just blue and green, but let's say a blue version of your deployment is running because you have deployed a green version of it. People are happy. They give a green light to the green service. Then you just cut over to the green service, route 100% of the traffic over there, send 0% of the traffic to the blue service.
There's a nice thing on blue-green that many people don't get on Kubernetes is that you need the double of the resource, like CPU and memory, to deploy two versions at the same time.
Yeah.
And you have to make sure that when you dimension like your cluster, you make sure that you have CPU and memory to like two versions being deployed at the same time.
Yeah.
That's a nice one.
Yeah, I hope that blue is not from blue screen of death, but
good one. Yeah.
Two colors.
Yeah, many people say my deployment is failing just because the cluster is busy running version blue, and it's trying to create version green, but there is no resource CPU and memory available. Then it's stuck there.
Yeah.
And nothing happens. There's a lot of configurations that can be done to make sure that this works.
Yeah, exactly. So I'll just continue with some more use cases. So another one of the deployment strategies that Istio, or for that matter, almost any other service mesh would add to your Kubernetes cluster is A/B testing. It's slightly different than the blue-green deployments. In A/B testing, just like Windows used to deploy its more recent bits, cutting-edge bits to a ring called insider ring, where you would get the more recent bits. You can test things out, and once they are stable enough, they are moved to a broader group of people. The same ways you can have your service increase its blast radius by first only allowing a finite set of users to access the service, and then as the service keeps getting better and better, ready for release, you keep increasing its blast radius. So that's another strategy. We'll see it in the form of a demo as well very soon. Security, I mean, I can't count how many people have implemented service mesh just to be able to add the features of observability and security to their cluster. So as we were talking about having security policies implemented within your cluster, for example, service A not talking to service B, these kind of concerns, these kind of policies can be administered on the cluster using service mesh. Bunch of more features, we'll talk about them in a later video. So while evaluating service meshes, you would often find people talking about a handful of meshes. Linkerd and Istio have been in the market for quite a while, and Linkerd is well known for its very easy interface because it has a very few constructs, objects that you can program with. Linkerd till now doesn't support multiple clusters. So if your services are spread across two different clusters, then it fails to identify the services that are present and individually in these two clusters. So that's why that's the biggest drawback of Linkerd at the moment. Istio fulfills that criteria. Is a bit more complex than other service mesh implementations, but has the most, is quite flexible. So we'll soon see how easy it is to use Istio, and easy as in from programming perspective, but obviously its constructs are a bit more involved than Linkerd's. Console is from HashiCorp. I haven't seen many companies use it, but it's another one of the popular choices. And the most recent one, as in I think it was born just last week or so. OSM from Microsoft. Well, it implements SMI, which is an acronym for Service Mesh Interface. So an initiative from Microsoft and some other companies was to unify the programming constructs of all the service meshes so that you can replace service mesh independently in your Kubernetes cluster. So you, for example, let's say you have Linkerd installed, you want to bring in STO, you don't have to change whatever policies you have, you just replace the binaries, apply the same policies back, and the new thing will start working, which is quite a good initiative. Linkerd supports it out of the box. Istio supports it via an adapter. OSM supports it out of the box. So we'll look at it in a subsequent video. If you want to know more about Istio, follow this series, then give us a like on YouTube, and also follow our channel. And for more cool stuff, please subscribe.
That's great, Raul. That's great. We're going to have all the parts and see what we have installed and how that works on the next part. Thanks, Fernando, for joining us. Thanks, Raul. See you guys soon.
Thanks, Raul. See you.
Bye-bye. If you want to follow Raul Ray, our speaker, just go for his blog, thecloudblog.net. There's a lot of blogs here, a lot of content. You can see links for his books. One of the books is the STO book, just released a few months ago. It's a very nice one. I really like the Kubernetes one as well. Have had a look before. And also, Raul is one of our bloggers and mentors. There's a few blogs here on azureta.com. Please follow our blog. And Raul is here as one of our main mentors. Thank you for following and helping. The community is all about helping others to publish content. Thank you.